Thank you very much for inviting me. The thing that I enjoy even not quite as much as growing things and propagating things is talking about propagating things. So it's always pleasant when people ask me to do that. I decided to go a little bit farther than I usually do with propagation and cover some of the things that we just kind of mention but don't talk about very much. And that is the fact that sometimes these seeds don't germinate. And I've taught a lot of workshops, and I know, one of the things people tell me is that you have a lot of problems with that. So let's talk about that. There are lots of different methods for propagating plants. And I think we're going to really focus on sexual propagation involving seeds. But there are also lots of other ways to do it: cuttings, layering, budding and grafting, division, and tissue grafting, tissue culture, which of course is the newest. The problem with that is that you can't do, this is not something you can do in your home very easily because it requires very sterile conditions, and I don't know what your kitchen looks like, but anyway, cuttings are also very important too, because the two main ways that we get new plants is through seeds and through cuttings. I've also been fooling around with a lot of unusual plants, not native, by the way, and they require, or they can be propagated with pieces of a leaf or pieces of a root, that kind of thing. So that's been a lot of fun. Anyway, we're going to really focus on the sexual propagation part. Cuttings, as I said, are very important, and cuttings are possible because plants will heal themselves. And so you can take take a cutting from a plant and talk it into forming some roots off of something that used to be a stem. So it's self-preservation, I guess. At any rate, seed propagation, of course, is a sexual cycle. And I'm talking to the choir here. I'm sure there aren't very many people in this room that don't know that already. But it does require that pollen be spread around. And that's why you folks are planting all those pollinators, or all those plants that are getting those pollinators in. And of course, that's what we preach, or at least I do, organic gardening. If you've got a lot of pollinator, or if you're planting a lot of plants that bring the pollinators in, the pollinators are your beneficial insects. And they're going to take care of you, but you have to take care of them first by planting things that bring them in. It's, that old plant it and they will come sort of thing. At any rate, the difference here, of course, in the sexual cycle is that you have potential for a lot of variability. If you're doing cuttings, what you get is what you see. And in this case, if you like playing around with things, seeds are what you want to deal with, because you can actually affect how the seed comes out. And I didn't pay attention to the time that I started talking, but I assume there's somebody in the room that's going to wave at me if I start talking too long. This is just gives you some idea of the variability that shows up. And of course, this is one of the ways that we ended up with those magenta bluebonnets, because it was a matter of going out there in the field and noticing that some of them were a little different color. They were a little bluer or a little almost a purple color, and so they gathered those seeds and kept growing them and growing them until they got what we now know as the purple bluebonnet. The advantages of seed propagation, of course, is it's cheap. If you gather the seeds, if you gather the seeds legally, it's it's very easy to do on most seeds. We're going to talk about some of the things that aren't quite so easy tonight. But you know, most seeds that we deal with, certainly I'm more of a vegetable gardener than I am a flower gardener. I love flowers and I plant them in my garden because they attract the pollinators, but what I'm really interested in is food. I used to say, if I can't eat it, I'm not planting it, you know, but I don't say that anymore. Most seeds that you deal with store very well if you're careful, and we're going to talk about storage. They can lack uniformity. You can plant 6 seeds and they don't all come up exactly the same. And it's interesting to look at that. If you're getting seeds from a commercial source, they have high standards if it's a reputable company. And if you have a problem with their seeds, it's really your job to call them and tell them that something happened. I planted seeds a few days ago and none of them germinated. And these are seeds that I've never had a problem with before, but I plan on communicating with the seed company because both of the things that I tried to grow didn't germinate. They're both from that same company. And you have the possibility of variability, which is, of course, one thing is it's longer time to maturity if you're dealing with seeds than cuttings, for example. It takes longer to get a viable a plant that you can take out and let it take care of itself out in the world. The parts of the seed, again, I'm probably talking to the choir, but what's important here is because we're going to talk about some of the things that happen when seeds don't germinate very well. And so the seed coat is one of the things we need to know about. All seeds have them. Also the cotyledons, the thing that eventually becomes the root, the radicle. And the beets and the beans are dicots, and the onion is a monocot, so they're slightly different. The cotyledons, though, are there in all seeds, and that's the food that the plant uses in order to become a plant. And so the seed coat is very, very important because in order for propagation to occur, the seed first has to get some water under that seed coat. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that difficulty in doing that. And then, of course, once the water is under the seed coat, it's digested by the interior part of the seeds, the cotyledon part, and translocated throughout the seed. And then germination occurs when the root emerges from the seed through the seed coat. And it's always fun when you're planting stuff with kids because they don't know why nothing's happening, and you have to tell them it's all happening underground. And they need to be patient. And if you're collecting seeds, some of the things you need to think about are ripening and dissemination. In other words, is this seed ready to be picked off the plant? Some of the problems you can get in there is a lot of the seeds, and often the native plants, the seed is in a pod of some kind, and the pod is very green, and so you don't want to pick that because the seed isn't going to be ripe until at least it's dried up a little bit. And you go out 2 days later and guess what? The pod is open and the seeds are somewhere else. One thing you can do, of course, is to tie something around that, and I've done that many times. Not a little plastic bag. You're better off with a little paper bag of some kind, or a cloth bag that you tie around that pod. And so if it does open, they'll be in there, and you won't lose them. Some seeds have to be processed before you can do anything with them. Save them for next year, whatever. And of course, any seed that or any seed that comes from a fruit, like a tomato or cucumber or squash, usually they're surrounded by something that's pretty messy looking, like mucus. That has to be gotten rid of. You have to ferment those seeds and get rid of that material. And that's kind of another workshop, actually, because I've taught that. Basically, it's just a matter of putting water, or just scooping the seeds out of the tomato, putting it in with water, sitting it on the windowsill for a couple of days, and watch it get really yucky and bubbly and all that. Eventually, all that's happening is that you're fermenting the liquid that's surrounding the seeds. And then eventually you can wash that off by putting it through a sieve and washing those off, drying them good, etc., and you're good. Then there are dormancies that plants have. The more I read about this, the more I realize that they aren't real dormancies. It's really seeds that have to go through some kind of a conditioning process before they'll actually germinate. The dormancy, it's kind of a defense against premature sprouting. I mean, you've got seeds laying all over the ground. How come they're not sprouting? I mean, how come if you have a pepper and it's got all these seeds inside and the pepper is fully ripe, why aren't they germinating? Well, if they did, they probably wouldn't live, because there's no light in there, which is what, of course, a seed needs once it starts germinating. But these dormancies that we talk about are really defense against premature sprouting, while the seed is still in some condition that is not conducive to forming a plant. And we're going to talk about seed storage too, because that has to do, many seeds need to be stored for a particular part of time before they are ready to be planted. There are other seeds which need to be planted very soon after they're removed from whatever body they were in. For example, if you want to grow a lemon tree, you better take the seed out of the lemon and plant it, because if they dry out, they're not going to germinate. People who go to citrus tasting usually go with plastic bags. Some have been even known to carry them home in their mouth. Yeah, well, I've been to some Urban Harvest citrus tastings, and people do all sorts of things, because usually there are a lot of unusual citrus, and so people are want to keep them or grow them. I'm not growing citrus anymore. It takes too long from the seed. If you want a citrus, and if you're my age, you go buy a grafted variety. Right. Yeah, I planted a grapefruit seed, and it was 9 years old in my backyard when the city came by to fix a problem with the sewage, and it was right under the tree. So 9 years is not long enough for a grapefruit. It has to be at least 11. So I did not doing it again. Okay, the type of seed dormancies or conditioning things that, or make it necessary for conditioning to happen, one is morphological. In other words, the embryo is not developed well enough, and even if it looks like it, the fruit that the seed came from is ripe and ready to go, it could still require a time of just sitting around and developing. Also physical, hard or impervious seed coats, like Texas Mountain Laurel, bluebonnet. Many of these seeds have such a hard coat, and even a waxy coat. If there's no pinholes or anything in that waxy coat, water can't get in there. And if water can't get in there, it can't start the process of germination. Physiological, internal dormancies often need drying and sometimes chilling. If you try to grow things that grow very well in Nebraska, they might not grow here because they have to go through winter, and we don't ever have one. I'm still waiting. I've been here for 40-some years, and I'm still waiting. Photodormancies, seeds that require light or dark conditions. Most seeds like to be covered a little bit, don't like a lot of light. Once they come up, once you see foliage, then you need as much light as you can get. But before that time, usually you can do very well with dark conditions. Lettuce, for example, carrots, they like light. So if you're growing things like that, you're going to put them on the surface of the soil and hope the birds don't get there before they germinate. And then, of course, there's always the case where you've got something that's really going to cause you problems by combining more than one of those. The winter dormancy that seeds have, to keep them from germinating before their time, before spring comes and everything's in their favor. It's really controlled by abscisic acid, which in the trade is called ABA. It prevents germination until the right time and place. It keeps the plant, it's an inhibitor. It's a chemical inhibitor that keeps germination from happening. ABA gradually decreases or is neutralized or destroyed as the seeds mature or are seasoned. And that seasoning could be something to get rid of or to condition that one of the dormancies that we just talked about, things that need to happen. Gibberellic acid destroys ABA, but it doesn't mean that you can just treat your seeds with it and it'll be fine, because it's a process that you have to go through. But it is present in some soil and so forth, and often the industry does use it in order to get things to germinate when normally they wouldn't. They do all sorts of cute things. Cold stratification is one way of conditioning a seed and overcoming a dormancy, and that's moist chilling. Seeds placed between layers of moist paper towel, or you can just mix it with some sphagnum moss and put it in the refrigerator. And this overcomes some of the physiological dormancies that can occur with seeds. This is kind of like, tulip bulbs have to be refrigerated for 6 weeks before you can put them in the ground. It's that kind of thing. And this is true. And it's going to be more true, I think, as our weather changes and things become a little bit warmer or uncertain. We may be having a little more trouble with germinating some of the things that normally would happen very quickly. Warm stratification is the same thing, only you're going to put it in moist, warm atmosphere with layers of moist paper towel and so forth. And this is around 75 degrees, which is just warm. It's not hot at all. And scarification is what you need to do if you've got an impervious seed coat. And that could be waxy, or it could be just a hard. If you've ever seen a mountain laurel seed, and you probably have because they are native to this country, it's like a bead, a very wooden bead actually, and they do recommend scratching. They say, rub it on the sidewalk. Well, if you don't care about your fingernails, I guess that works. I found that you can simply soak it in warm water on a windowsill in the sun for a couple days, and that softens it enough so that you can actually nick it just with a sharp knife. And in the trade, they use sulfuric acid, but I wouldn't recommend that. Okay, in order for a seed to germinate, it has to be in the right environment. And the seeds sense all these things. The seed knows whether or not there's water around, whether there's light, Temperatures, there are minimum, maximum, and optimum temperatures for germinating seeds. Interesting thing, in Yellowstone some years ago, you remember the terrible fires, and of course in California had terrible fires all the time. And it turns out that after the fire dies down, lots of young plants pop up. The trees that burned down are now popping up as seedlings and so forth. And it turns out that the ash and the smoke from the fire actually contain chemicals that get rid of the ABA. If there are commercial suppliers of seed for trees, usually, they actually sell, along with the seeds, a paper that's impregnated with the smoke and ash chemicals that are there, so that before you plant the seeds, you soak them in water with this paper. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting thing to throw in, because nature has its own way of curing problems, like where all the trees are gone, what do we do now? Okay, so Mother Nature says, well, we can fix that. Also oxygen and CO2, and that depends. The seed can't be too deep, first of all, because otherwise if it needs a little bit light, all seeds need a little light, right? The deeper they are, the less light they're going to get, because it can sense light, whether it's on the surface or buried. But if your soil is compacted, as many of the soils around here are, before you start digging in them like you should, if it's compacted, there's nothing down there. The oxygen and CO2, none of the gases that are normally in the atmosphere are down there because it's too compact. A good soil should be 50% pore space. This allows for water and oxygen and any other gases. Nitrogen, even though it can't be absorbed by the plants, is still going to be there. So all of this is necessary. Although we say to start germination, all you need is water. Well, that's true, but you need the right environment too, as well as that. Temperatures are interesting for something. I told you I'm a vegetarian when it comes to planting things. But for kale, for example, you can plant it at 75. It's a little cool. 80 is maximum. So if it's over 80, don't plant any kale out in the garden. 60 is the best place for it to be. So, you know, right now, on certain days, we could start putting some kale, or I've already done that, but corn, you've got between 50 and 95, but 60 is good. So again, you can get that in the spring. Sunflowers can be planted anywhere from 68 to 86. They germinate very quickly, and marigolds 70 to 80. But there is a range of temperatures there which is optimum for certain plants, for all plants, really. Okay, if you've gathered some seeds, native seeds, or maybe your neighbor has a really nice something and it has seeds and you asked permission and got some of those seeds, they will keep for quite a while if they're stored properly. If you've purchased seeds, the best thing to do is to keep the bag that they came in, because that bag was manufactured to hold those seeds and protect them for a certain length of time. Often on the seed packet, it will tell you how long these seeds should be good for. Don't believe it because it's like the expiration date on your whatever you bought in the grocery store. they're covering their whatever, and as a result, they're really quite good. I have a friend who calls me when he goes through his closet and finds something, can of something, and asks me if it's okay to eat it, and I said, no. I usually toss a coin and give him an answer, and no one. Most things are fine. You know, look at the can. Does it look damaged? How long has it been in it? You know, it's a judgment call. Anyway, so paper bags are good. I mean, if you've gathered seeds, first of all, make sure they're very, very dry before you put them in anything. And the best thing to put them in is paper, first of all, because if they are just a little bit damp, that paper will absorb some of it. If you put them in a plastic bag, that's going to hold the moisture in and your seeds will probably rot. So paper is good. And then, of course, you can put them into a plastic bag. You can put them in a jar if you want to in your refrigerator. Just do not put them in the fruit drawer, because the gas that's given off by ripening fruit will kill your seeds, right? So you can put them in a glass container of some kind. You can even put a little one of those things that come with your shoes to keep them from getting moldy. You can put one of those in there. That keeps it good and dry. And I have actually a refrigerator that my daughter had. Well, actually I don't, because that one died. I had to buy a new one. But it's a small refrigerator on my porch, and that's where I keep all my seeds. I think there's a couple bottles of beer in there too, actually. So we're going to talk now a little bit about, if you have any questions as we go along, it's okay with me, as long as it's something that you think everybody else might be interested in.
Do you have to keep them in the refrigerator?
No, but you want to keep them in a cool, dark place.
Okay.
Yes, I keep them in a refrigerator because I have a refrigerator. And because I'm a master gardener and I need a lot of seeds. Also, we had the garden for 9 years, and I grew all the seedlings for the 20 beds there that we grew things in. So once you have your seeds and you're going to plant them, we're going to talk a little bit about how that works. You need sterile containers. It doesn't matter what they are. They can be cottage cheese containers or yogurt, whatever. Just make sure you punch some holes in the bottom, because you need drainage. You need viable seeds. Well, how do you know if they're viable? Well, they've been in the refrigerator for 2 years, I'm not sure. Wrap them take 10 seeds and wrap them in a moist paper towel and put them in a plastic bag and stick them someplace warm. 2 days later, go take a look at them. If nothing's happening, wait 2 more days and take a look at them. Eventually, and usually within 5 or 6 days, something is going to happen. If nothing happens, and nothing happened with those the seeds I just mentioned to you, I tested them because they didn't come up. I thought, well, maybe I did something wrong. I tested them in a paper towel. None of them formed roots or anything else. So there's something wrong with those seeds. But you can test them. You can save them. I never throw seeds away. I either give them to somebody or I plant them. That's why my yard looks like it does. Anyway, you can test them to make sure. Most seeds are good for 2 or 3 years. There are some that they recommend you buy new every year, simply because they don't keep. They deteriorate. You need a germination media of some kind, in other words, soil of some kind. You need moisture. You need atmospheric control, and we'll talk about that a little bit. You will eventually need light and fertilizer. Just to grow to get the seeds in the ground, you need all this. This you don't need until they start coming up. Media for seeds and cuttings. This is perlite, this is vermiculite, and this is a soilless potting soil. And you can see it has some perlite mixed into it. This is a 50-50 mixture of perlite and vermiculite. And this I often use for when I'm doing the cuttings, roses maybe, or African violets, that kind of thing, because there's a lot of pore space in here and it makes it really easy for the roots to grow into this material. This could be peat based, or they're doing more now with coconut coir. And ththese are readily available in most nurseries have it. One thing it's getting to the point where you cannot buy just plain old potting soil. All of it has some kind of a moisture control, or it's got fertilizer, all this kind of stuff, which you just don't need. I prefer to put my own fertilizer in, so I try to find some that doesn't have fertilizer, but it's hard to do. You're paying for it. There's not much of it in there, but they're still charging you for it. So here you go. You're going to review any information that you know about these seeds, about this plant, so that you have some idea of, does it need warmth? What do I need to know? How deep am I going to plant it? Does it need light? Does it not need light? You're going to label the container with a date and the type of seed, because believe me, there are a lot of things that you can't tell one from the other until they bloom. And that's a long time to wait. Moisten the medium, whatever you're using, the potting soil in other words. Don't use dirt from your backyard, because seeds are very, they can die really easily. They're bacterial rot, all kinds of bad things can happen. That's why you want the sterile medium, because if you've got a new bag, it's good. Moisten the medium and fill the container. I always moisten it like in a dish pan or something, and then fill the containers so that I know it's evenly moist. If you put the dry material into whatever you're using to plant the seeds in, and then water it, do you know? I mean, I guess you could mix it up with a spoon or something to make sure it was good and moist, but if you're doing more than one pot, you might want to do it another way. And you can use anything. As I say, there's cottage cheese. These are paper pots that you can make out of newspaper, which works really well. Because you can just go plant that whole thing out in the garden once it comes up. Just make sure you chop off any paper that's above the soil level, because it'll act like a wick and your plants will dry out too fast. Any plastic container you've got around, these things you get when you buy plants. Small seeds, medium, should be pretty close to the surface. There's a general rule, it shouldn't be any deeper than twice the size of the largest measurement of the seed. So look at the seed, just don't poke it down 3 feet, because, yes.
Question back here?
Oh, okay. Yes.
Sorry, this was about the planting medium.
Yeah.
I would agree with you on the fertilizer, but I've recently read that one of the first things that the embryo root does is look for a fungal companion. So would you say it's also important to make sure you're adding some kind of, like, I guess, mycorrhizal fungi in there? And if so, what would your suggestion be to do that?
I wouldn't worry too much about that at the time. If you're, I use a lot of fish emulsion, which has a lot of that in it when I fertilize.
Like a liquid,
Yeah,
diluted?
right. That's really a lot better than any kind of a granular mix that you can use. At any rate, so 2 to 3 times the depth of the seed, and cover with the medium. Or you can cover it with vermiculite, which is what I do, because the vermiculite absorbs water, and so it holds you have a moist layer right on top, which is very close to the seeds. So the moisture stays there, and you don't want to if you let the seeds dry out, they will never germinate. You cannot wet them again and hope that it will happen, because it won't. And then water very carefully, make sure you're not washing the seeds out. And then cover with clear plastic or glass, or place in a warm but not sunny area. You can put it back from a window, You can even put it on a heat mat because bottom heat is very beneficial to seeds to get them to germinate a little quicker. And unless you've got some instructions that say otherwise, well, where am I going? I'm going to go backwards. Oh, I guess I'm not pointing it at the thing. That's the problem. Unless you've got know more about this plant, other things that you need to know, bottom heat is a good thing. And once something comes up, once you've got foliage showing, that's when you want to start fertilizing a little with a little more fertilizer. You also want to cut the temperature down a little bit because it's warm to germinate, but they grow better if it's a little cooler. So keep that in mind. When we had a greenhouse at Master Gardeners out in Bear Creek, we always, when things were germinating, we had it nice and warm, but we usually cut the temperature back once everything was up. Okay, mini greenhouses are great, and you know, if you eat out occasionally, these take-home boxes are great because you put your things in there with the seeds, you close the lid, and you can see what's happening, and the water stays there. You don't have to go out there and moisten them every day. You can also use plastic bags. That works just as well. I bought a terrarium, fish tank with a top on it. I use that all the time. I just put things in there. It stays nice and moist and warm. Or you can just put a clear glass cover over it. That works too. And light, you're going to need light. This is my back porch. This is a grow light that I built many, many years ago when I first started doing this. And then when I was growing so many seedlings for the Turning Point Center, I bought one of these. I've now converted they were fluorescent. Incandescent light doesn't work. It doesn't have any of the wavelengths that plants like. They like red and they like blue. And so I've now converted from fluorescent, these are now LEDs, and they work very well. Plus the fact that they last a lot longer than the fluorescents do. Fluorescents will lose wavelengths as they age. And so you need to replace them practically every 6 months in order to get some good growth. But I have everything is now LED on the back porch. And also there's a fan over in the corner that keeps air moving, that you also need that if you're going to grow things out there because good air circulation is extremely important. And then once your seedlings are up, another...
For a certain wavelength to start the seeds?
Not to start, because they don't need the light. But once they're up, they need red and blue. And you can actually buy specific grow lights, LED grow lights that have those wavelengths. And once your seedlings are up, of course, you can lose them. And especially if you've planted them so many seeds in one pot. That's not mine, I didn't do that. But you need to lift them from the bottom. You cannot pull them up, okay? So what you're doing is you're using, I don't know, it could be a pencil, it could be, we call them a dibble, but it's basically just a stick. And then once they're up, make sure you support them and get them into another pot as quickly as possible because that's when you can lose them. And they need, once you've got 2 true leaves, you can actually transplant. And then they're on their own and they've got lots of room to grow and all that. They need room to grow. And there's some resources here. You're not getting a copy of this, but this will be available to you on your website.
When you're getting them out, you're not supposed to touch the stem.
Exactly, yes.
You can,
Well, touching, you can touch.
But you don't.
Yeah, the problem is that if you break the stem, it's dead.
Okay.
If you pull off a leaf, it'll grow another one. It's no big deal, yeah. These are wonderful books. If you're interested in plant propagation, there are 2 that I think are really wonderful. One of them is this Making More Plants by Ken Drews, who is the horticultural writer for the New York Times, and it's a beautiful book, and it's got lots of really good information. The other one is the American Horticultural Society, Plant Propagation. It has a lot of really good specific information on, I mean, almost any plant that you want to find is in there somewhere. And propagation is an experimental science, so have fun. And that's the end of my story.